Resident Evil 7 reinvigorated my and many others' feelings about the Resident Evil series as a whole. It's a fantastic entry to a beloved series, and Resident Evil 8 is so close to release. But there's a problem. One of the main components that resulted in Resident Evil 7 being such a refreshing take was the switch from a third-person view to a first. Coming from a horror perspective, it frankly makes things more scary. Like, I can see my own hand get chainsawed off. Mwah. Beautiful. This level of immersion was simply unobtainable in other titles due to them having constantly visible and named protagonists. Ethan is obviously named, but he has very few personality traits, except his one-liners.
Do me a favor and stay dead.
He's simply named and given a voice to give him a reason for being in the plot. Like, we need to know why a person is in such a scary situation. Like, if we didn't have Mia, we'd just be screaming at our TVs like, "Leave, Ethan! Bitch, run!" So Resident Evil has always needed named protagonists with dialogue and characterization because we need rationalizations as to why they're there and what they're trying to do. But I don't think Resident Evil really wanted intricate characters, at least not in the beginning. The story wasn't at the forefront for the first few Resident Evil games, and the characters are...
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
But third-person Resident Evil seemingly felt shackled to the already established characters from earlier entries. Characters like Claire, Chris, Leon, etc. all kept returning, like f***ing T-1000s, to fight off whatever monstrous threat that emerged. 7 seemingly did away with this, with that one simple change of the perspective shift. So, well, that's great, right? Resident Evil managed to return to its horror roots while also cutting off the problem of feeling like it had to have named characters by turning to a first-person point of view. Well, I thought so. Then Ethan and Chris f***ing Redfield popped up in the Resident Evil 8 trailer. This might not seem like a problem to you sitting there judging me, but I think it could potentially be a huge issue for the Resident Evil series moving forward. So allow me to explain why I think in the past, Resident Evil had a huge character problem, but also why I think Resident Evil 8 might resurrect this problem. See what I did there? Resurrect. Let me also say that this video won't be addressing the quality of each game. I might discuss those things in the future, but this will strictly be about character and storytelling, not about Resident Evil 5's action mechanics or the bosses from the series or, you know, which zombie noise is the best. Frankly, I prefer the over the oh. Resident Evil released in 1996, and the characters in that were, frankly, terrible. But they didn't have to be great or good. The story was simple enough to try not to distract you with having to focus on the characters. It now has this, like, corny charm due to the fact that the characters don't feel like real people at all.
Jill, here's a lockpick. It might be handy if you, the master of unlocking, take it with you.
But Resident Evil 1 through 3, while their scripts aren't great, don't require amazing characters or writing. That is neither the point of the game or even the stories. The stories for these titles are simple. You're in a spooky place and you must leave spooky place. When Resident Evil 2 and 3 released, we got the same deal as we did in the first. Low focus on character and more focus on the plot, taking them from point A to point B to point C. It's simple, and for horror titles, that works. And I can't stress this point enough, those games didn't have plots that required great characters. Like, does that mean better characters wouldn't have helped the games? Well, no. I mean, like, I like Jill sandwiches as much as the next guy, but I can also admit that having a little more focus on the characters would have just been a net positive. Also, anybody know where I can get a Chris sandwich? I can be the master of lock picking on that haunt. But my point is that the original games didn't require fantastic characters because of their simple stories, so I can't knock them for not having them. But Then Resident Evil 4 released and frankly changed the direction of Resident Evil forever. Resident Evil 4 has survival horror elements, but this time character is more front and center than it has ever been in a numbered title. Leon is an action hero personified, which you would think would be a weird mix, but it works due to the outlandish nature of this game as a whole. They clearly play up the B-movie elements to the game's plot and interactions. Everything is incredibly over the top in Resident Evil 4, and the dialogue is incredibly tongue-in-cheek.
I have an idea. Since you're here, why don't I introduce you to it? It should keep you busy.
Can't remember the name, huh? A senior moment, perhaps.
The game also knows when to break up the tone from goofy and wild to more quiet and tense. Again, Resident Evil 4, whether intentional or not, absolutely nails survival horror and its mixed, cheeky tone. But then we get Resident Evil 5. Resident Evil 5 took all of the wrong lessons from Resident Evil 4. Instead of acknowledging the B-movie elements of 4, they decided to double down on action and make the tone almost entirely serious. Cyborg Redfield is back, but after the death of his partner Jill Redfield, he must have a new partner, Sheva Redfield. This is how she's introduced, by the way. I'm sure she'll be back. Chris and Sheva make up the protagonists of this game, and considering that the plot starts with Chris losing his previous partner, someone who he was extremely close to, you'd think we'd get some fantastic moments with him and Sheva coming to understand each other and learning to become partners, and no, I'm gonna stop. We don't get any of this. And like I said before, I wouldn't mind poor characters if the plot wasn't telling me to care, but this plot is heavily centered around partnership, and especially the character of Chris. But the issue is that these characters are so bad. Chris is essentially a Hulk action figure personified, and Sheva is bland. Every Resident Evil character up until 4 is essentially a copy-paste zombie-killing robot. They have essentially no character traits or differentiating factors. If you disagree, alright, can you tell me 3 personality traits of Claire? Alright, what about Jill? Okay, come on, definitely Billy. Well, okay, what about Leon Kennedy? Motherfucking yes, I can! Leon is a great character in 4 because he's ridiculous. He plays up the ridiculousness that 4 provides with his quirks and fun attitude. Chris and Sheva, though, there's none of that. They don't even have chemistry as partners, which if I had to guess, this is because the idea of this game being a co-op experience was decided before the story was even made, which is totally fine, but then why make the story about partnership and Chris losing one of the most important people to him to do nothing with it and have the characters not develop at all? I'm dogging on Resident Evil 5's characters, and yeah, they're bad, but there are worse. No. Resident Evil 6 decides to bring back all of the mannequins to make an all-star cast. They're also in a perspective-shifting title with 4 perspectives. Wow, this is just like 13 Sentinels. I bet it's just as good. Resident Evil 6 tries with some of its characters, but really fails with almost every single one of them. The cheeky tone of 4 is, again, gone, and the seriousness of 5 in terms of character focus and a more complex plot is even more amplified here. The plot is fucking too much. There's amnesia and clones and espionage and explosions everywhere. But hey, at least Leon is back, right? Well, he is, but because this is Resident Evil 6, every fun trait that he had from 4 is now gone, and he's now just another zombie-killing robot, like the rest of the cast. Resident Evil 6 has a lot of critics, and for a lot of reasons, but I can definitively say that it also has the worst characters in the series, and it's because they're so utterly underdeveloped and boring inside of a story that now requires that these characters be developed and characterized. So does all of this mean that Resident Evil can never return to having named characters that make consistent returns? Well, no, and the game that proves that this can work is Resident Evil Revelations 2. Resident Evil Revelations 2 released in 2015, and the game centers on an episodic, multi-charactered story. Kind of like Resident Evil 6, except this time the story and the characters aren't trash. Whoa.
What universe do I live in now?
Wait, all the characters aren't named Redfield? Oh wait, no, actually Claire Redfield is in this game. And while she's still the most boring character here, her co-star, Moira, is actually fantastic by Resident Evil standards. What Revelations understands that almost every other Resident Evil title doesn't, is thematic unity. The game is all about fear and regret. Moira is afraid of firearms due to what happened during her childhood, so when playing as Moira, you can only use melee weapons, which, from a horror perspective, makes things just scarier. The story is also Saw-esque, where the antagonist watches the protagonist, but there's also a gimmick in the story too, where if you become too afraid, you become a zombie. It sounds kinda dumb, but it's thematically cohesive, and I won't spoil the ending or anything, but the characters actually do grow and overcome their fears. If you're going to have a horror story that focuses on character, I believe that this is the best approach. Having main characters who connect with the themes of the story, of which the horror is crafted from, is beautiful. I mean, or you could just have Chris punch a boulder, whichever suits you. And now we get to Resident Evil 8. Look, I'm as excited as the next guy for this game, but I'm not excited for the Rock'em Sock'em Robot to return. Chris showing up here worries me because of what I said before. Resident Evil has continued to be unable to view its history with the critical lens that it deserves with its characters. The characters in Resident Evil are mostly, dookie, and aren't the appeal for the series. Like, yeah, people love the characters, but for nostalgic reasons. And I mean, people will dress up as like literally anyone from the series. Do I believe that Resident Evil 8 will be anything like 6 though? Absolutely not. No, they learned their lesson there. But I am worried that we may bring back the precedent that they should bring back characters from older games. That Capcom will somehow think that bringing back Chris actually helped sales with the game or something, so that the next Resident Evil title will be some time-traveling Resident Evil action game where we must return to Raccoon City to collect the Tesseract, or something like that. Resident Evil clearly did some soul-searching from 6 to 7, and while I personally think 8 is gonna be great and much better than the other titles, I wanted to try and explain from a storytelling perspective why I think 5 and 6 really missed the mark with character. So I wanted to make this video to point that out. I do believe that Resident Evil is currently at its best, but I want to make us all aware of what one of its worst problems really was. But for real though, it's clear that is S tier.
That was too close. You were Jill Sandwich.
You're right.